Hey nerdy knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and I believe knitting is a form of self-care. You can take time for yourself and your creative hobbies like your knitting, and also still create beautiful garments that you love to wear. And I really want to focus on one of those particular garments in this video, all about knitting your first top-down circular yoke sweater with all the customizations, so you can mix and match and really customize the way the sweater fits you. Let's start by going over the construction of the sweater itself. I'm wearing one sample and I have a sample on the mannequin behind me, so we can talk about all of the different possible ways you can knit this sweater. So it starts by casting on at the neckline, and you can choose from 3 different edge line treatments or edging treatments. So reverse stockinette, a knit one, purl one rib, or a twisted 1x1 rib. So you can choose which one you want to use for that. And even before you start with the edging, you have to decide on your neckline. With mine, I'm wearing a lower round neck. I don't like sweaters that sit right up on my neck. I prefer them a little bit lower. But if you like a crew neck, that's what the mannequin is wearing. So that one starts up here, right close to the neck. So you can choose which neckline you prefer. That's where you're going to start. Choosing your edge line treatment or edging treatment, and then also choosing the neckline, whether it's a crew neck like the mannequin is wearing or a lower round neck like I'm wearing. And then after you finish knitting the yoke, we've got lots of increases to do all of the yoke shaping. We divide the body and the sleeves. Now the body, as far as customizations go, we've got a few different things. For those who have fuller busts, generally above a C cup, there are some tips and tricks we can do to adjust the fit. So more of the fabric is in the front where we need it and not so much in the back. Sometimes if you've ever knit a circular yoke and you have a larger bust, you find that a lot of excess fabric is hanging out in the back. We don't really need it in the back, but we do need it in the front. So we're going to talk about moving some of those stitches to accommodate a fuller bust with a companion worksheet to walk through that process. Only for those who need it. Everybody else can skip that part. And then we can go on to the rest of the body. And there's 2 body lengths. You can choose from a cropped length like the mannequin is wearing, which goes right to the waist, or more of like a hip length that you would wear with your pants or whatever. That's the kind I'm wearing. And then there's also optional waist shaping you can include. Now this part isn't in the pattern, it's going to be in a separate worksheet, so you can work out your own waist shaping. Then you can also use that worksheet for any other pattern that you use in the future. And there's also a video published here on YouTube that walks you through exactly how to do that process. I just thought it was a little too much to have in more of a beginner focused pattern, so it's going to be completely separate. You will have the worksheet with your pattern, so if you want to do any sort of tapered or A-line or hourglass shaping, which is what I've done with my sweater. I put a little bit of hourglass shaping in the back. Then that is an option that you can have, but it's a separate worksheet and a separate video, and it will walk you through the math so you can do those numbers for yourself. It's not specifically spelled out how to do that with this pattern because we all have different waists and bodies, and we all want our sweaters to fit differently. So I'm going to show you how to do that math so you can apply it to any sweater pattern in the future. Then once you finish the body of your sweater, you'll finish with an edging treatment and then bind off, and then it's time to pick up the sleeves and work on the sleeves. And we have some customizations there as well. In my sample, I'm wearing balloon sleeves, which means I pick up the stitches and I'm just knitting a straight tube without doing any decreases, and it keeps it a little bit more ease. And then right at the bottom, there's a quick little decrease to pull in the sleeve a little bit, and then you finish with an edging treatment. I decided to go with some reverse stockinette. It almost looks like a little bit of I-cord, but much easier. Now the pattern, it does have that as more of a 3/4 length, but I decided to just shorten mine, which is very simple to do. That's an easy thing to customize since there's no decreases in the sleeve. You can kind of just knit it to the length that you want and then do that decrease round and finish with your edge treatment. The other options for the sleeves are a short sleeve, which is about 1 inch of knitting before you finish the edging on there, or if you want like a wrist length normal tapered sleeve, that's also an option that's in the pattern as well. So as you can see, there are lots of ways to customize, from the edging treatment to the neckline that you want, the body length, optional waist shaping, and even the sleeves. You can choose a mix and match and create a really custom sweater for yourself. And we'll walk through that whole process step by step. Along with the pattern, you're going to need your needles and some yarn. We're using sport weight yarn for this pattern. Now, I'm using 3 different yarns. All of them are sport weight, all of them from Knit Picks. So my sweater is knit with Knit Picks Galileo, which is a blend of merino wool and viscose from bamboo. So it's got a bit of a shine, nice drape, very soft, really shows each of the stitches though. So you can really see like where all of the yoke increases are done. And this color is called Stardust. The mannequin is wearing Wool of the Andes Sport. The color is called Fairy Tale. This is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. So this one is a little fuzzier and more woolly feeling, and it's going to not show all of those yoke increases as much because of the fuzziness of the yarn. They are a little more hidden. So depends on what you want to see in your sweater, what kind of wool you want to use. You can use like a natural 100% wool, a little bit on the fuzzy side, and that's going to hide those. If you use something with some plant fibers like bamboo in it, you're going to get clearer, crisper stitches, and you're going to see almost looks like a big necklace around your neck, which I kind of like in a yoke sweater. And for the tutorial, we're going to use another yarn. So this is Heatherly, another sport weight yarn. This is a blend of 80% acrylic and 20% merino wool, and another great choice for a top-down circular yoke sweater. So speaking of yarn, these are the yarns I'm using. I do have a video all about choosing yarns for this type of a sweater. Types of sweaters where you don't have any seams to provide structure, like a circular yoke where you're knitting and you're just working in the round and then dividing everything. There's no seams up here that create like sort of a skeleton for that sweater. So you have to be a little more cautious about your yarn choices. The 3 I'm using here are all perfect for this type of a sweater. The one kind of fiber you want to be cautious of using is something that's primarily plant-based, like linen or cotton or anything like that, or 100% bamboo. This one's okay because it's blended with wool, and wool has great memory and elasticity and it will hold its shape. Plant fibers don't generally do that very easily, so you want to be cautious of using those when it comes to knitting a garment that doesn't have any sort of structure, shoulder seams or anything like that. But all of these types of yarns, 100% wool, mostly acrylic, those are all great choices for this type of a sweater. So along with that, you're going to need your knitting needles as well. Sport weight yarn usually requires like between a US 3 to a US 5. I actually went down to a US 2 because I tend to knit a little loosely. But you want to choose a needle size that's going to give you the gauge, the same gauge as the pattern. So whether you knit more loosely like me and need to go down, or whether you're pretty much on target with gauge most of the time, and then maybe you somewhere between a US 3 and a US 5, or if you knit more tightly, then you might want to go up another needle size. So you're going to want to swatch and make sure that you meet the gauge so your sweater will come out the same size as I intend in the pattern. Now, I have a whole video that dives into the topic of swatching, and honestly, I don't always swatch if it's for hats or mittens or something like that, but when it comes to a full sweater, I always swatch because I don't want my sweater to be my swatch. I want to know how that yarn's going to act. I want to wash and let that swatch dry exactly like I'm going to let my sweater get washed and dried, so I can see how that yarn is going to react. It's an important part of the process of knitting a sweater. I'm going to link to that video so we don't have to go through the whole process of how to swatch, but I will link to that so you can go watch that if you're unsure of the process, because I highly encourage you to knit a swatch so you know how your yarn's going to act, and also so you can check your gauge and make sure it's going to match the gauge in the pattern. Now, some basic guidelines: use the yarn that you're going to actually knit your sweater in. Don't use the same brand or a different brand, like same sport weight yarn or whatever. It's got to be the same yarn that you're going to use for your project. And use the needles that you're going to use for your project, not just the same size, the actual needles you plan to use to knit that sweater. Knit your swatch on that, knit a good size swatch, and also do your swatch in the round or a fake in the round swatch, because the sweater is knit completely in the round except for the short rows, and there is such a small section, it doesn't matter if your gauge is a little bit different, it should just be fine. But you want to swatch in the round as well. So for all the other information about swatching and measuring your swatch for gauge, I'm going to link to that other video. Now, the last thing to discuss before we actually get to the overhead tutorial is choosing the right size. Now, the pattern will tell you like your bust measurement, and then it's going to tell you the finished measurement of the sweater. In general, that finished measurement of the sweater is about 2 inches larger than the listed bust size. But you don't have to follow that. You can decide how much ease you want. If you want your sweater to be a little larger, then go up a size. Choose a size that's going to give you more ease through the bust, more positive ease. It's slightly larger than your body. But the larger the bust, the more difficult that is to do, because you don't want it to be too oversized, because there's a bigger difference between your full bust and your upper torso. I have about a 5-inch difference, and that if I were going to go into a very oversized territory, my sweater would get really baggy up here in the top just to fit my bust. So I chose the size that gives me actually no ease right at the full bust. It's the actual size of my bust. You can see it's not skin tight. It's still plenty loose up here. I have probably about 5 inches of ease through the upper torso of my sweater, and it just fits my bust. No negative ease, no positive ease. It's the size of my body. So if you are larger than, say, a C cup, this is something to consider, is about how much ease you want in your sweater. It gets to be a little, not trickier to choose a size, but you just want to be a little more cautious about too much ease in the full bust, because then it gets to be too large up here through the upper torso and the shoulders. So choosing a size actually that is close to your actual bust size will still give you ease in the top part, and then it'll just fit through the bust. You could even go an inch or two of negative ease at the full bust, and you'll probably still have some excess ease or positive ease in the top of your sweater. So the bigger the difference between your upper torso and your full bust, the more cautious you have to be about choosing the size. Now, the sizes that are listed in the pattern are giving you 2 inches of positive ease compared to whatever your full bust measurement is. But like I said, you can choose a size. Like if I were to knit, I should have gone up a size or 2 for myself to get that positive ease, but I wanted more fitted through the bust and less ease through the upper torso. So I chose one that was my actual bust measurement, and it's not super tight. So don't be concerned about having a super tight sweater. You could even choose one that has a little bit of negative ease at the bust, and it'll probably still have some positive ease at the top. I'm speaking to larger than C cup sizes here, because you're getting into a difference between that upper torso and that full bust measurement. Anything smaller than that, there isn't such a big difference, so you don't have to be so concerned. But as far as sizing, you can follow the pattern. You choose a size that gives you 2 inches of positive ease at your full bust. And for larger sizes, then maybe think about knitting one that is like your bust measurement exactly, or maybe with just a bit of negative ease at the full bust. And that'll still give you some positive ease through the top where we need it, because you need to move, so we need to have some positive ease here. And also, you're going to want to do some of that optional bust shaping when we get to that part where we are dividing the body and the sleeves. Basically, for C cup or larger, C cup you can decide if you want to do it or not. Larger than that, you're probably going to want to take some stitches from the back stitch count and move them to the front, because you'll want more fabric across the front where your bust is and less across the back. But we're going to walk through exactly how to do that. There's an extra worksheet, so you can customize that depending on how many stitches you need to move. But I'll walk you through exactly how to do that when we get to separating the body and the sleeves. So now let's get to the overhead, and we are actually going to cast on and knit our sweater. So gather your supplies. You're going to need the pattern, you're going to need your yarn, you're going to need knitting needles. Now you're going to need probably a 16-inch to cast on at the neckline. The smallest size, crew neck, you might need double pointed needles or some other needles for knitting a small circumference in the round, since it's smaller than 16 inches. And then by the time you get to the body, a 24-inch circular will be just fine. And then you'll need a 16-inch circular or smaller needles for knitting a small circumference in the round for the sleeves, especially if you're going to do a tapered sleeve. sleeve, you'll need double pointed needles or magic loop, 2 circulars, whatever method you like for knitting a small circumference in the round. You're going to need some markers, a beginning of the round marker, and then some other ones depending on waist shaping and things like that. You're also going to need some barber cord or waist yarn. Basically, the sleeves have to be put on hold on something. You can use a spare needle cord if you have one and leave it on there. I'm going to use some barber cord, but embroidery floss, waist yarn, sock yarn would be perfect. Anything like that, just to put those sleeve stitches on hold. And we're going to need a tapestry needle at the end to weave in all our ends. The first step is to choose your neckline edging. Now you can combine edgings like I did. I have a reverse stockinette on my cuffs and then regular rib on the neckline and the hem. This one has reverse stockinette for the neckline and the short sleeve, and then twisted rib for the long sleeve and the hem. So you can combine any way you want, but you want to start by choosing the trim you want at the neckline. So reverse stockinette, that twisted rib, or your standard 1x1 rib. Now for reverse stockinette, you can just use the needle size you're going to use for the body of the sweater. If you're doing any ribbing, if you're doing twisted rib or the 1x1 rib, go down a needle size or 2. It just neatens things up and makes those stitches look similar to the regular body stitches. So choose the size that corresponds, choose the needle size that corresponds to the ribbing or the neckline trim that you want to do. So same needle for the reverse stockinette, a needle size down 1 or 2 for the ribbing. So once you know what needles you need, then make sure you grab those and grab your yarn. The next thing to do is to decide on your neckline. So do you want a high crew neck that sits right up around your neck, or do you want a lower neckline, a round neckline basically, that sits a little further away from the neck? You have to decide that and go to that page in the pattern that follows along with whichever size you want to do. So after you read through the notes about the edging options, we're going to go to the instructions, either page 6 or 7, you'll go to your crew neck or your round neck shaping. So I'm going to cast on the round neck and we'll get started. Crew neck and round neck, the cast on's exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the number of stitches you're casting on. Once you've chosen your neckline trim, you can get your yarn, a beginning of round marker, and the appropriate needles for whatever your edging is. We're going to cast on. So I'm just going to use the long tail cast on. Any cast on that you like is probably just fine. The knit cast on, the cable cast on. Probably not the backwards loop cast on. That's not great for edgings like this. We'll use that for the underarm though. But for now, just choose a cast on that you like. And we're going to cast on our stitches. So go to either page 6 or 7 for the instructions for the crew neck or the round neck, and then just follow the instructions for the cast on number. And remember that the size that you want to knit has a corresponding number in those parentheses or the brackets that will correspond with the size that you want. So just choose that size and start casting on your stitches. So if you want to do a long tail cast on, you need to leave a long tail of yarn and drape that over your thumb, and the other yarn goes over your finger. You kind of grasp it underneath. This is like your slingshot position. I like to just place my needle on top and swoop it towards me. And that replaces a slip knot and it counts as my first stitch. So there's 1 stitch cast on. Then I go in this position and I go into the loop on my thumb. Grab this yarn, sort of like a yarn over, and come back through that loop again. And then let the thumb tighten up, but I'm not yanking it super tight. I don't want to do that. That tightens up my stitches. I just want to use the needle tip to size the stitch. And then repeat that process. Go into this loop that's on my thumb, scoop that yarn, pull it back through the same loop, going in the other direction, and tighten it up. But you're free to use the knit cast on, the cable cast on, German twisted, whatever cast on method you like that will give you probably a firm but fairly stretchy edge so your sweater will fit over your head, especially if you're doing the crew neck. You want a nice stretchy edge. So I'm just going to cast on the rest of my stitches for this sample, and then we'll talk about our edging treatments. So I finished casting on my stitches. My next step is to check and make sure my cast on isn't twisted, that it's all facing to the inside. And I'm in this position ready to join in the round. I've got the working yarn over here, and the part I want to join is in my left hand, and I've got my marker. So I'm going to pop that onto this needle. And when I work my first stitch, I like to hold both the yarn tail and the working yarn just for the first stitch. Just kind of, I think it can help to lock things and close it up. I can use that tail to tug it tight later on to close things up. So now we're going to start our edging treatment. I'm going to start with reverse stockinette. So that means I'm going to purl for 3 rounds. That's the edging treatment for our reverse stockinette. So I'm just going to purl 3 rounds. You can replace that with whatever edging treatment you want to do. If you want to do the rib or the twisted rib, you're just going to do knit 1, purl 1 rib, or the knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 through the back loop, purl 1 if you want to twist it. So I am just going to purl for 3 rounds, and that's going to give me that little reverse stockinette edge. Let me show you again on the other sweater, or actually on my sweater. This is how it looks. So we're going to do purl 3 rounds to get that reverse stockinette. And you can see it kind of curls to the inside, which is what we want. We want that cast on edge to sort of curl in. We just see this round edge. It's really great for necklines and sleeves. It's a little bit more tricky on a hem depending on the circumference, because the wider that circumference, the more likely it is to start curling up along the stockinette portion. Because the sleeve is so small, it doesn't want to do that. A larger neckline, it might do that as well. So I like to use it for necklines that are smaller and also for sleeve cuffs. I think it's a great choice. It's a bit more tricky if you're doing the hem, because it might tend to start flipping up, and we don't want that on our sweater. I like to use rib there instead. But it's a great option for a neckline or for a sleeve cuff. 1 by 1 rib, you would knit 1, bring the yarn to the front, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. You're going to do that all of the way around, and you should have an even number of stitches in the body. So you should start with a knit and end with a purl. So your last stitch should be a purl stitch, and that will line everything up. And this first round kind of helps you establish that stitch pattern. So let's say I wanted to do twisted rib here. So I'm going to knit through the back loop, purl 1, knit through the back loop, purl 1, and that would be my twisted rib. Once your neckline is complete, whether you're doing like I've done the reverse stockinette, or if you've done like an inch or so of your twisted rib or your 1 by 1 rib, we're going to start the short row shaping. Now I like to work mine right up in the neckline, because then those short row turns can hide right there. If you look really closely, then you can see that they kind of get hidden in here, right along that neckline edge, so we don't see the short row turns. So to work, we're going to use German short rows, but you are free to substitute whatever short rows you like to do. Now all these short rows do is add a little bit of extra length to the back, so the back neck sits up a little higher, and it drops the front neck so it sits a little lower and it doesn't start to feel like it's choking you. So here if I lay this flat, this is the mannequin sample, you can see the front neck is much lower than the back neck. They don't sit perfectly at the same depth. This one's a little bit lower, so this part back here fills in the top of your back neck, and then it drops the front. So if you don't want to do short row shaping, you can leave this step out, but it's a nice little finishing detail that helps drop that neck, and it makes your sweater fit just a little bit better. And they're not hard to do. We're going to do it right now. So your pattern, follow the size that you're using, and you're just going to knit a certain number of stitches. I'm at the beginning of round right here, and we're going to work in stockinette stitch. So we're just going to knit. And then it's time for our short row turn. So we turn, because we're going to work back and forth in rows right now. And to work a German short row, we just want the yarn in the front. We're going to slip that stitch, and then you just pull it up and over, tugging it tight, and it sort of makes what's called a double stitch. Right here we can see both legs of the stitch. And when we come back to it, we're gonna knit those two legs together. But now we're working a wrong side row, so we're going to purl to the same point on the other side of the marker. So I bring the yarn to the front and I'm gonna purl. In my case, it's just 5 stitches. So slip my marker. So now we need our short row on this side. We're going to go back and forth, adding more short rows and resolving them. So now we have to turn. And same thing, yarn in the front, slip that stitch tip to tip. We're slipping it purlwise. Bring the yarn up and over. Give it a tug and you can see it gives us that double stitch. And now we're going to knit to the beginning of round. Slip our marker. We're going to knit to that first short row that we made. And you'll see it when you come up to it. It looks very funny. So there it is right there. And all we're going to do is we're going to like treat it sort of like a knit two together. It's got 2 legs. We're going to knit both of them together. So make sure you're getting into both legs of that stitch like that. Knit it together. And then your pattern's going to instruct you to knit so many stitches past that short row. So in my case, I'm just going to knit 5. And then we repeat the process, and you can see already we're starting to build up some extra fabric right here along the back of our sweater. So we turn, yarn's in the front, slip that stitch, pull the yarn up and over to make our double stitch, and now we have to purl back to this short row over here. So I bring the yarn between the needles to the front, and I'm going to purl to that point. And same on this side. I'm on the purl side, but there is that double stitch. We want to enter into both legs and purl them together. And then follow your pattern, however many stitches you have to work past that stitch. And we're on a wrong side, so we're just going to purl. And then we turn. And we repeat the process. So this is the whole process. You're going to make sure the yarn's in the front, slip that stitch, yarn up and over to create your double stitch, and work to the previous short row. So your last one, so this will be my last one. So there's one right there, where I'm gonna work 2 more, and you can see how we're gonna resolve them. Okay, I'm coming up to that last short row. I'm going to knit both legs together, and then I'm going to make my last short row. So I'm going to knit 5 more stitches. Turn, make my short row, up and over. And then I'm going to purl all the way back over here to the short row that's on this side. So there is my short row. Purl it together. And then purl the stitches I need to. Okay, so your last turn. And there you can see we've got a bit of extra fabric here in the back that we haven't done anything to these front stitches yet. So we've added some extra fabric here. Yarn's in the front. This is my last short row turn. You'll see the final row says to create that last double stitch. Slip the yarn, pull this up and over, and we're going to knit to the beginning of round marker. So that was our last short row. So you'll follow your pattern and do as many short row turns as it tells you to do to build up the fabric on that back neck. So I'm at the beginning of round, and then we have one more round because we still have 2 short rows that have to be resolved. And this one over here is a bit tricky. So we want to, because we're coming at it from a different direction. So we want to do something a little different to resolve that. So we're coming up to this one first. And this is in the same direction we're used to. So we're just going to come up to it and knit the legs together. And there it is right there. So I'm going to knit those legs together. You can see we're still right up by our edging here. So these short row turns where we make them is right along this edging, which is really nice. It hides them right there so we don't see them. Instead of having them down like in the fabric of the sweater where they're a little more obvious, we can hide them right there. So I'm going to keep, now we're resuming knitting in the round now. So I am going to keep knitting until I come to that other short row right here. So I'm coming up to my short row and I want to stop 1 stitch before. So this is not my trick. This is Patty Lyons' trick. I'm going to link to her down below. But because we're coming at this from a different direction, if we just knit the 2 legs together from this side, we can end up with a weird hole right here. Because we had started, we worked it coming from here and working back and forth, but now we're coming at it from the other side. So what we're going to do is slip. We're 1 stitch before it. So we're going to slip this stitch as if to knit. And then we're going to treat these like 2 separate stitches. We've got 2 legs of the stitch here. I'm going to go into the back of this first one, knit it through the back, slip this stitch over it. I'm going to pull it up and off the needle. And this, we still have the second leg here. We're also going to knit that through the back loop. And that can close it up. And we still have the same stitch count. We haven't changed anything, but we kind of closed up any hole we might have right there. So I'm just going to keep knitting. Back to my beginning of round marker. I finished my back neck short row shaping, and now we can continue on in our patterns. So the next part of the pattern is to knit a few inches or so, or rounds. The pattern spells it out specifically. Then we're going to stop and do our first increase round. So that is the next thing to do, is just continue knitting in the round until it's time to do our first increase. Your pattern tells you specifically how many rounds you should have to knit. So taking a look at our little sample here, that was the short row shaping back here. So now if we look close, we can see that first increase round is right here. So we have to knit this much, and then we're going to stop and do our increase. So after you finish knitting that bit of length after your short row shaping, it's time to work the first increase round. And I've started mine here. I'm also starting to switch to another needle. I started with a very small, a 9-inch circular, and I'm going to switch to a 16. If you're knitting like the adult size sweater, you probably started with a 16-inch circular, and on one of these increase rounds, you're probably going to want to switch to a 24 or a 32-inch circular, depending on the size you're knitting, and maybe further down in one of the other increase rounds. So at some point, you're going to want to just stop and switch needles. And I like to just start knitting with the new needle. I've already started it here. I just 1 stitch before my marker, I grab that new needle and I start working with the new needle and knit the stitches right off the old needle. And we've got 4 increase rounds to do. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to demonstrate the first one. You can see with the sample here, if you look closely, there's an increase round right there. There's the second one, there's the third, and there is the 4th right there. So the crew neck version has 4 increase rounds. The round neck version is missing this one because we're starting basically where that increase round is. So we are removing this much of the fabric for the round neck. So the round neck is going to start here and then have 3 increase rounds. So these top 2 are going to be the same for all the sizes. You're going to knit 2, make 1 left for both of those. And then the last 2 in the crew neck version and the second 2 of the 3 in the round neck version, those are spaced out more, and it depends on the size that you're knitting. One size might have you doing a knit 3, make 1, or another size could have you doing a knit 6, make 1. It's going to depend on the size of the garment that you're knitting. But the top 2 are all the same for all the sizes. So I'm going to demonstrate that, and then you'll understand how to work them. So you're going to work an increase, you work a certain number of rows, you work your next increase round, work another certain number of rows, work another increase round, more rows, and then your final increase round. So 4 rounds of increases altogether for the crew neck, 3 rounds of increases for the round neck. And then after that, you're going to have to knit a little bit more length before it's time to divide the body and the sleeves. But let's go ahead and look at how we're going to do that increase round. So I've already started mine here. So our increase round is knit 2, make 1 left for this first one. And I've already started doing that. I just did a knit 2 and I'm knitting onto my next cord because I need a larger cord for this part. So to do a make 1, we're using the make 1 left. So we look for that running bar that is attached. If you look at this stitch that's on the needle here, and I pull on it, I can see this is the running bar that is attached to it. So I want to pick it up. I want to pick it up so that leg is leaning to the left. And then if I knit into the center of that, I'm going to have a big hole, and I don't want a hole. So I'm going to knit through the back leg, and that twists it closed. So that is what we're using for our increase. So knit 2, make 1 left, pick up that running bar. It should be leaning to the left, and then knit into the back of it, trying not to split that stitch. And that twists it closed. You might still have a tiny hole there, but that's pretty normal. So knit 2. If I pick up from the front, and I can see right away, oh, if I knit through this leg, I'm gonna have a big hole. We don't want that. So turn it around. Should be leading to the left, and now I'm in the back. I can knit through the back. So I'm just gonna keep doing this all the way around, so we're adding a whole bunch of stitches. And if it feels like it's splitting and it's hard to get in there, I can come to the front and kind of go up and around and then through the back. 2, make 1 left. So this is your first increase round for both sizes. And if you're doing the crew neck, you're going to have to do this again. And then later on, it's going to vary a little bit. It might be a knit 3, make 1 left, or a knit 6, make 1 left. You just find your size in the pattern and follow that. But this is how you do the make 1 left. So this is pretty much the whole yoke. We're just adding a bunch of stitches so it can fit through the shoulders and the body. Okay, I'm coming up on the end and switching my needle cords. I gotta be careful not to lose these stitches. And my last one is here. So I'm done with that. I can pull it out, but I still have 1 more increase to go. So now, I'm switched all over to this new needle and my last increase right here. So now I'm at the beginning of round. That was my first increase round. So the pattern is going to tell me how many plain rounds to knit before I repeat that. So I'm just going to keep knitting in the round until I've finished those rounds. Then I'm going to repeat that increase round, knit some more, repeat a different increase round. You're still doing make 1 lefts, but it's going to be spaced out a little further, and then repeat. So I will see you back here after I finished my yoke shaping. So you'll be just working that increase round, knitting a bunch, working your next one, knitting a bunch, working your next one, and then after that last one, you're going to keep knitting until you get to the armhole depth that you need. So I will see you back here when we have to split the body and the sleeves. The yoke is actually pretty simple. It's just that increase round followed by some plain knitting 3 or 4 times, and then more knitting probably for about another half of the yoke depth until it reaches your underarm. Now I'm going to demonstrate how we have to separate everything, the body and the sleeves. Of course, this is a tiny little sample, so it's not like a full sweater right here. But so at this point, you have done 4 increase rounds, or 3 if you're doing the round neck version. And then from the last increase round to the armhole, you're just knitting straight. And that's like another half of your yoke pretty much. Now this part is customizable. You do have like instructions about how deep that armhole should be. But if you want to change that, you can change it in this last half. What you want to do is put everything on waste yarn or a barber cord and then try it on. I would wash it and block it actually, and then try it on. You want this to be able to go beneath your underarm fairly comfortably. You are going to be casting on some stitches under here as well to add some extra circumference here, but it should go to your underarm, be maybe an inch past your underarm, and then sort of be able to pinch it underneath your underarm, knowing that you're going to still add a few stitches under there as well. So you want that depth when you try it on to be at your underarm or deeper, depending. If you want a lot more ease, then it could be a lot lower. But at this point, you have done your 3 or 4 increase rounds. You've knit to the armhole depth that you want, either following the pattern or making your armhole depth shorter or longer, depending on the fit that you want. The next step is to divide everything. We're going to separate the body and the sleeves. Now, what if you have a larger bust? Now, this is where we want to change things a little bit here. So you use your worksheet. You can figure this out for yourself. And I'm going to show you on my sweater right now exactly how that worked for me, and show you exactly how that process goes. So if you don't need to do that, you can skip ahead to the next part and skip the bust shaping part. But if you're a C cup or larger and you want to move some of that extra fabric to the front along your bust where you need it, then go through that next section using the worksheet to figure out how many stitches you need to move for your sweater. Adjusting for a full bust in a yoke sweater is actually pretty simple, but we do need to do some setup first. So I have finished like the yoke of my sweater, and right here, this is the marker that marks the center of the back. So I've placed markers to separate the front and the sleeves. So your pattern will tell you how many stitches you should have in each area. In my case, I have 145 in the back. I have 120 or 102 for each sleeve, and then another 145 in the front. So at this point, minus the sleeves, we have the same number of stitches in the front as in the back. Now, one other thing to note, because this is an odd number, I have 1 extra stitch compared on this side compared to this side. So there's 72 stitches from the beginning of round to this first sleeve marker compared to 73 on this side. That doesn't really matter. It's just 1 stitch. You can decide where it should go as long as you have that stitch count in the back and then that same stitch count in the front, and then your sleeves are divided. So I have 4 markers here. They're basically dividing everything up. Here's the back right here. Here's the 2 sleeves, and then here's the front. So this is how it would be if we weren't making any adjustments at all. At this point, we would just go on to the next part of the pattern where you're knitting to the underarm, putting these sleeve stitches on hold, casting on some stitches, knitting across the front, putting these sleeve stitches on hold, casting on some underarm stitches, and then knitting to the beginning of round again. But when it comes to a full bust, we have a difference between our back and our front, our bust along the front and our back. And that's going to be different for every single person. So let's see how this works for my sweater. I have 4 inches of stitches that I want to take out from the back and put in the front. So I just need to know my 1-inch stitch gauge, and the pattern gauge is 6 stitches to the inch, and multiply that by that 4 inches. I want to move 4 inches, so 4 times 6 is 24. So 24 stitches altogether need to be removed from the back and added to the front. And because the back is divided in half, we're going to divide that in half as well. So for 24 stitches, we're going to take 12 out of this side, and we're going to take 12 out of this side and move them to the front. So to do that is pretty simple. All I'm going to do are move these markers back. Like I'm just going to take this marker here for my sleeve and move it back by 12 stitches. And that puts it right there. And I'm going to do the same for this marker. Move it back another 12 stitches. And I'm going to do that same thing over on this side. So now I should have 24 extra stitches across the front of my sweater. Sleeve stitches remain the same, and I should have that 24 that I took from the back will be in the front now. So I'm going to stop and count everything and make sure my stitch counts are correct. But this is all you need to do for a bust adjustment in a yoke sweater, is decide how many inches you need to move, figure out that 1-inch stitch gauge, multiply that by the number of inches to give you a stitch count, and then divide that in half, and you'll take half from each side and just basically move your sleeves back a little to put those extra stitches in the front. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do this exactly. Now, I actually like to mark it all out before I just start knitting and moving stitches onto waste yarn, just so I know I have everything where it's going to be. So our marker is marking the center of the back neck. So this is the back of the sweater like this. That's how it's sitting. That's how it, well, if we move it like that, that's how it's sitting right now. Like, and our marker is marking the center of the back neck right there. So this is the back of the sweater. This is the front, and then we've got 2 sleeves over here. So I'm just going to place markers to section out this little sample. Okay, so I've double checked all my numbers. I've got my markers. So this is what this looks like right now. Now you don't need to place markers, but I just find this helpful. Like, here's my center back neck. So this is the back of my sweater. Between these 2 markers is the front. So it should be the same stitch count. It might be 1 stitch different between front and back depending on the size you're knitting. And then a sleeve here, the right sleeve, and then the left sleeve is over here between these markers. So it's all marked out. So I know at this point I'm going to be knitting to this marker, putting these sleeve stitches on some waste yarn or barber cord, casting on some underarm stitches, knitting across the front, putting these sleeve stitches on a barber cord or waste yarn, casting on some underarm stitches here, knitting to the end of the round. And then it's all separated and I can just finish knitting the body. But I find it helpful to just have the markers placed. You don't have to do that, but this is just an extra step. You can just follow the pattern. It's going to tell you how many stitches to knit or whatever. So you're going to knit however many stitches it says for your size. That is the back, half of the back stitches basically. Okay, so I'm getting to the end of those stitches, and I know at this point this is my sleeve right here, so I want to transfer all of these stitches. Now you can transfer them to waste yarn, so get some waste yarn or some embroidery floss, put it on a tapestry needle and thread these stitches onto that waste yarn, or use if you have a spare needle from an interchangeable set, you can slip them onto that and leave them on, like put the end stoppers on and hold it in place there. I'm going to use this barber cord, which you just look up jewelry cord on Amazon and you'll find it. I have a whole big spool of this stuff and I use it a lot. And you just push it on that needle tip. And I'm just going to slide these stitches to this marker because I've marked out my stitches. But the pattern tells you how many stitches for each part that you're going to separate out. I just find it's helpful just to use markers. So I want to stop right there. There. I can take this marker out, careful not to lose those stitches. So now these are just going to hang out on this cord. It's a pretty long cord. If I was concerned about it falling off or slipping off, I can just put a knot and that'll hold it in place. And now we want to cast on our underarm stitches. I just use the backwards loop cast on. So I just have to cast on 3 stitches for this little sample. So I just take my thumb and go like this, make a loop, put it on there. 1, 2, and 3. You're going to do that for all of the stitches you need to cast on. You're going to join that to the stitches over here. So we're joining the body together and we'll knit across. This is our front. This is the front of our sweater, the front part of the body. So we've cast on our underarm stitches and I kind of knit this one kind of firmly, making sure I'm not splitting my stitch, just to snug it up right there. And then go back to normal tension. I'm going to knit over to the other sleeve where I've already placed my markers. Or follow the pattern, it will tell you how many stitches to knit. So that is the front part of the body. And I'm coming up to my left sleeve. So I'm going to repeat exactly what I did like I did on the right sleeve. Take that marker off, use another piece of barber cord or embroidery floss or waste yarn or spare needle cord and just slip those stitches over. There, I can take that marker off. I can tie this just to hold it in place. And then I have to cast on our underarm stitches. And of course the pattern will tell you how many to cast on. So I'm just using backwards loop. Thumb on top, make a loop towards yourself, and then slide it on. Thumb on top, loop, 2, 3. And then join to this back side of the body. There, so now we have done the major part. The yoke is finished, our sleeves are separated out, and now we can continue knitting the body. So, and if you have a larger bust, you moved your stitches to the front, so you still have like a full circumference for your whole bust, but the stitches that you need for the front have been moved, so they will fit there. So this is, if we look at it right now, this is our little sample. Yoke is finished, sleeves are over here on waste yarn. Now we can just continue knitting the body. So you have options here. You can knit a cropped length according to the pattern. You can knit like a hip length according to the pattern. You can use the bonus worksheet and the companion video to figure out how to add some hourglass shaping or some A-line shaping. It's a whole separate video, and then you can use that information for every sweater you want to knit. To add it to this was a little too much because this is supposed to be a beginner sweater, and adding all of that information was a lot. So you can just knit it straight, cropped or short or anywhere in between, basically however long, wherever you want your sweater to fit on your body. Now, if you want to do some waist shaping, I like hourglass shaping, and here is a quick look at what that looks like on the back of my sweater. I only did it on the back. I don't like it on the front, on my stomach, but I do like it on the back. So I've got a whole video that explains this, and you've got a worksheet that is included with this pattern. If you look closely, you can see where those decreases were worked here, work straight for a little bit, and then increased on the bottom part. But this is how you customize a sweater to fit the way you want on your body. But that's all explained in the video, so I'm not going to put too much here, but you have options. You can combine hourglass shaping in the center of your sweater. You can do some A-line shaping on the sides. Combine the two if you want, or don't do any of it and just knit a straight sweater. So you've done the major portion of your sweater at this point. You've done the yoke, which is a lot of work. You've separated things out. So now we're going to finish knitting the body. So I'm going to finish knitting my sample, and I will come back and show you how I finish off the trim. And then we will look at the sleeves and how we can customize those. Coming up on those cast on stitches that I cast on at the underarm, and we're just going to treat them like stitches. They could be a little bit loose. It's okay. Just knit them. Later on, we'll come back when we finish things, pick up our sleeves, and we'll do some fixes to close up any gaps. So those are my backwards loop cast on stitches, and I just knit across them. And I'm just going to continue knitting the body, and I'll do this on the other side for the other sleeve as well, or the other underarm stitches. And it is like a bit loose right there, but we'll deal with that later on. So you're just going to keep knitting the body until it's done, adding your waist shaping if you like. And I will see you when we get down to the hem. So here's progress on my tiny sweater, and hopefully you've had good progress on yours. So I'm ready to do the bottom hem. Now, one more note that I forgot to mention. For some of the body sizes, the stitch count is uneven, and for a knit one, purl one rib or twisted rib, we need an even number. So on your last round, when you're switching needles, go ahead and just work a knit two together somewhere just to get rid of that odd numbered stitch. The same thing might happen on a sleeve as well. So if you have a size where you have an odd number, the pattern will tell you, it'll just tell you just decrease before you work the edging treatment. And all you have to do is somewhere in that final round when you're switching needle sizes, just do a knit two together. Now, if I'm going to do 1 by 1 rib, I'm not going to bother to change my needle size, but I do recommend that if you are changing needle size, you're doing your 1 by 1 rib or your twisted rib, then at this point I would grab whatever that smaller needle was and start knitting onto that and do 1 round onto the smaller needles. By switching now and knitting 1 round first, you are creating slightly smaller stitches that'll be closer to the size of the ribbing. And I just think it looks a little bit neater. So if you're going to switch to a different needle size, do that after you've finished the body and you're ready to work your hem. Grab your new needle size, just start knitting 1 more round onto that new needle size. And then you can switch to working the ribbing treatment. So I'm just going to work in 1 by 1 rib for the bottom hem for about 1 inch. So to work 1 by 1 rib, you would knit 1, bring the yarn to the front, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. You're going to do that all of the way around, and you should have an even number of stitches in the body. So you should start with a knit and end with a purl. So your last stitch should be a purl stitch, and that will line everything up. And this first round kind of helps you establish that stitch pattern. So we're going to work this all the way around. So I'm coming up on the end. I'm almost at the beginning of round again. There we are, ending with my purl. So now I've established my stitch pattern. I'm just going to continue working in my rib pattern for 1 inch or so. And this of course is also customizable. Make the hem edging as long or as short as you like. You do want at least 1 inch or so to make sure like the bottom hem doesn't flip up, because it is all in stockinette stitch, and if your hem is too short, then that stockinette stitch can still roll up. So we want to avoid that by having enough ribbing on the end to keep that from happening. So at least 1 inch, possibly more if you prefer. So I'm just going to keep doing that, and then we'll come off and bind off the body, and we're going to bind off in pattern. So I finished my bit of ribbing along the hem, and I want to bind it off. We're going to bind it off in pattern. So I'm back at the beginning of the round. I can take my marker out now. So to bind off in pattern, we just continue working the same pattern as we bind off. So I have a knit stitch, I'm going to knit, and then I have to do 2 stitches to start the bind off. So purl, and then I pull that first stitch over the second one, trying not to split it. And then we just continue that. Next stitch here is a knit. So we knit, pull it over. Next stitch is a purl. So we purl that stitch, pull it over. Don't do this tightly because you don't want to have the bottom of your sweater be too tight. Knit stitch, so we knit, purl stitch, so we purl. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing this until I get to the very last stitch. All right, coming up here on the end of my hem, last few stitches. And purl that last stitch, pull this stitch over, and then for the last one, I just simply cut the yarn and pull it right up through. And then later on when we weave in ends, you can see it's kind of got a jog right there. But we'll close up that gap. That just happens because you're technically knitting in a spiral. So the end of this row is like above the beginning of that row, but we'll close that up. But let's get on to our sleeves. That's the next step in our sweater knitting process. So at this point we have our yoke is all done. We've got short row shaping. We've got the body of the sweater, a couple ends to weave in. And now it's time to make those sleeves. So we have 3 options for the sleeves, which we'll go over in a minute. But before we can do any of those, we actually have to get our sleeve stitches back on the needle. So depending on the circumference of your sleeve, you might be able to do this on a 16-inch circular, like this right here. I'm doing a very small sleeve, so I'm just going to go to double pointed needles. So you can use double pointed needles or whatever other method you like for knitting a small circumference in the round. Like perhaps a short circular needle for an adult size sweater, that would be just fine. I think mine is even too small for that. Yeah, so I'm just gonna go right with the double pointed needles. Or a magic loop or 2 circulars, whatever method you like for small circumferences in the round. At the beginning part, you might be able to get away with 16-inch circular, depending on the circumference of your particular sleeve. But then later on, the balloon sleeve, you'll stay on the same needle size the whole time. Short sleeve, you'll stay on the same needle size for the whole time. But if you're doing the full length tapered sleeve, you're gonna at some point have to switch to like working that small circumference in the round, because the size of your wrist dictates how big that circumference is. So, but to start, you want to get your needles. So the first thing you want to do is get these stitches back on their cord. So if you've done waste yarn, then you're just going to get your needle and slide them back on like that. If you are using like a spare interchangeable needle cord, you can just put your tips on there and you'll be ready to go. If you're using barber cord, it's just a matter of sliding the stitches back onto a needle. So I'm just gonna slide about half of these onto this needle, because when you're working with double points, you need at least 3 needles to make that little round circumference. So let's see, probably right about there. It doesn't have to be super exact. So there's some stitches, and I'll put this rest on this needle. So now we need to pick up stitches from our underarm cast on. Now, generally patterns are going to have this done a few different ways. You might start at one edge and work all the way across. You might start in the center and then work all the way around back to the center to mark that beginning of round. We will need a marker for that as well. So let me grab a marker so I have that handy. But so the number of stitches you pick up, it could be the same number that you cast on, could be the same number plus 1, which is my preference, or it could be a different number. In my particular pattern here, I went with the number that was cast on plus 1, and then to adjust like the sleeve or the body size, you might have an extra stitch or two to cast on as well. So why that happens is because if we look this way, this is where we cast on. So we're looking for the V's. A V is a stitch. So we can see there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. There are the 3 stitches that I cast on originally right here. 1, 2, 3. If I flip this over, and now we're picking up our stitches from this direction, it doesn't look like 3 anymore. If we still follow, we're looking for the V's even in this direction. There's 1 here, and there's 1 here, here, and here. Now we have 4. So when I go to pick up stitches, I'm going to pick up 4 stitches, not just 3, because I want to pick up in each of these spots. The second thing we have to deal with is what's happening over here with these loose goose stitches on both sides. Generally, one side's a little neater and one side's a little looser, totally fine. But we want to close that up a little as well. So we'll do some things to close up those holes. We'll pick up a few extra stitches or some running bars just to close things up. Now, don't get too picky about this part, because as you're knitting, you're like staring right at your fabric and at the underarm, and no matter what, you might end up with a small hole, but nobody's going to see that. It's in your underarm. Like, nobody is going to see that hole. And so step back and like put a little distance between you and your knitting after you've picked things up and you've knit around, and then see how does it look. Because when you're up close staring at it, you can see every little defect, but when you're wearing the whole garment, are you really going to notice that? So just pay attention to your holes, but don't get so like distracted by them, because it's totally different when you're wearing the full sweater. So what we want to do is pick up these stitches and fix the things over here. I'm going to start over on this edge and then stop halfway to place a marker, because we want to put a marker in the center of our underarm. That'll be our beginning of round. So I know I'm going to be picking up, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the 4 stitches I want to pick up. So the first one's here, but I want to close up any holes I might get on this side. So I'm going to pick up this bar and also this bar, and we're going to decrease them away later on, but I want to pick them up for now, just so I have them on there. Doesn't matter how I pick them up. I just want to get them on my needle. Now we're going to grab our yarn and we're going to pick up, in my case, 4 stitches. And you're generally going to do half of them and then place a marker and then do the other half. So this can be a little finicky, and I'm working with double points, so let me see if I can get this going here. So I know I'm going to follow that trail of V's. My first one is right here. So we're going underneath. There's that cast on edge. I'm going above that first V under the cast on edge, grabbing my yarn and pulling up a new stitch, just like we're knitting, holding onto the tail. We don't want to lose the other end. Making that stitch. If you prefer, you could do this with a crochet hook as well. So there's the first one. I'm going to pull on that. I want to hold on to that tail. And then look for the next V right here. And we're going to go under that cast on edge. And there is my, oops, I lost that one. Do that again. There's my second stitch. So I have 2 stitches and then those 2 running bars that I picked up. Now I'm going to place my marker, because this is going to be the center of my underarm, and then I have 2 more stitches to pick up. So following the V right here, going under that cast on edge, and then 1 more if I follow the V up to here. And this one is pretty loose. We're going to go under there and catch that. And then I'm going to repeat, going to put my yarn down for now. I'm going to do the same thing I did over here. There's this running bar that's running right here, and I want to pick it up twice on this side, and then there's this loop. We'll ignore that and we'll pick up this one. So now I've got everything I need. And if you're concerned about being able to tell what those loops are, you can put like stitch markers in them. I know I've got 2 stitches on either side, and then I've got those running bars. So what we want to do first is deal with this second running bar, because we're going to start knitting our stitches here. And we want this one to sit underneath this stitch, and we want to make sure it twists closed. So let me grab a second needle here. So I'm going to move this over to this needle just so it's with the stitch I want to work it with. And those stitches can hang out right there. So I want to look at it and figure out which direction I should knit it in. And my yarn is over here, so I'm going to do this kind of firmly. I want to close up any gaps right there. So if it's sitting this way, and I know I'm going to do a knit 2 together, let me find my stitch here. Okay, there is my stitch. So I can see if I knit into this and then knit into that as well, it is going to twist it. If it were sitting this way and I knit into it, it's going to be a big hole. So I want this one leaning to the right. So I know that that's situated the way I want. Now I've got to pull on this a bit just to make a little space, because my stitch is here. That was that running bar, and I'm going to knit them together. I'm going to pull firmly because I want to close that up. Then I'm just going to knit across my stitches, normal tension. Now I'm going to go all the way around to where I picked up those other running bars, and we'll deal with both of those. Okay, so I'm coming up. I know that first running bar is right here, and I need to just put it with this stitch. So I'm going to slide those stitches up and move this over here with this stitch that I have to work, just to get myself in the right position. There's my yarn tail. I want to hold on to that later so I don't loosen up my stitches there. So on the other side we did a knit 2 together. So on this side we're going to do an SSK. So I know I want to slip this stitch so it will slant in this direction, and there is that running bar right here. So I want that to go in the left. I want that facing left as well, because it's going to be knit through the back loop, and we want to close it up. So that's leaning off to the left now. And I can put my stitch back and I can knit them together through the back. Try not to split that stitch. So that one's dealt with. Now we have this running bar, and we're going to repeat the process, but this time it's another knit 2 together. So I want to look at this stitch, and I know if I knit into it this way, big hole. So let's turn it around. So if I knit into it there, it's going to twist it closed. But I'm going to knit it together with this stitch here that's on the other side of it. And that was our first stitch that we picked up. So hold on to that yarn tail to keep it tight. And we're going to knit that together. There we go. So that one's gone. We're knitting, we're back to the beginning of round, and we have one more loop to deal with right here. So we did a knit two together there, so we're going to do an SSK on this side. So we want to slip this stitch because that's our first step in a slip, an SSK. And we want to look at this one and see which way it's leaning. If we knit into the back of this big hole, so we want to turn it around in that direction. So now it's facing the same way as our SSK, and we knit into it, it's going to close that hole. So now we have closed our holes as good as we can. They're not exactly perfect, like right there. There's still kind of a little gap, but we can come back later in the finishing process and maybe move some yarn around, use our tail to close anything up that's right there if we have to. But that does reduce it as much as possible. So that is the first step, picking up all of your stitches and closing up the gaps that you might have around the underarm pickup. So let's talk sleeve options. We have 3 sleeve options. First is short sleeve, which we are just going to knit for about an inch or so. You can see there's my underarm pickup right there. I knit for about an inch just in the round and then did my edging. And for the edging here, I did that reverse stockinette. You can do your 1x1 rib or your twisted rib. So that's short sleeve. Very, very simple to do. Balloon sleeve is just as simple. And that's what I did on my sample, which it is pretty much the same as the short sleeve down until you get to the cuff. So you are picking up your stitches, you have everything there, and you're just going to knit straight. You're not doing any decreases, so you get this nice puffy sleeve. Then right at the end, we work one round where we knit 2 and then knit 2 together all the way around to get rid of some of those stitches and pull the sleeve in just a little bit. And then finish with our edging. So it's very similar to the short sleeve. You're just knitting a tube basically for your sleeve, and then right at the bottom, we do a quick decrease round and then finish with our edging. Then the third option for our sleeve is the full wrist length tapered sleeve, which we start like this, the same way. We've got to pick up our stitches. We do a little bit of knitting, and then where that beginning of round marker is located, we start working 2 decreases on either side of that marker to taper the sleeve down to the wrist, and then finish with an edging down there. So we'll demonstrate that as well. But those are your 3 sleeve options. You can pick the one that you want to do, and then we're going to go through them right now, starting with the short sleeve and the balloon sleeve, since they are very similar. So I'm transferring a few stitches to my underarm pickup needle just so I have a few more there. So at this point, we've done everything we need to do to pick up our stitches. We've closed our holes. We've decided which sleeve we want to do. Now for all the sleeves, you're starting out exactly the same. You're going to start by just knitting in the round. Even for the tapered sleeve, you're just going to do a few rounds of knitting. Now this is, if you need to adjust the length of the sleeve, this is a good place to do it. If it's too short, you can do this like sort of knit straight area for a little bit longer. If the sleeve is too long, then reduce this part. Like I have an inch of just knitting straight. You can just take that right out and just do maybe a round just to get yourself all set up. So for the short sleeve and the balloon sleeve, all we have to do is just keep knitting until it's the length we want. For the short sleeve, it's about an inch. For the balloon sleeve, the pattern tells you like how long to knit your sleeve for, or try it on and see where you want it to fall. As long as it's anywhere between the elbow and the wrist, then choose the spot that you think is right for your sweater. So I'm just gonna knit a few more rounds, and then we'll talk about the edging as well for those 2 sleeve options. So I like a reverse stockinette is really nice for the edge of a sleeve, or your twisted rib or your 1x1 rib. I think we'll do reverse stockinette on this one. So if this were a short sleeve, I would finish this probably right about now, maybe a couple more rounds, depending. The pattern has about an inch, but you can customize it. If you want it to be a little shorter, then just don't go for an inch, go for maybe half an inch, which is probably what I'm going to do right here. So let's say I wanted to finish this one with a short sleeve. That's all done. I've picked up my stitches, done a bit of knitting. I am back at my beginning of round. And I would stop right here and I would choose my edging. What edging do I want to do? If I want to do reverse stockinette, then I would just switch and I would start purling right here at the beginning of round. Or if I wanted to do my knit one, purl one rib, then I would start doing that, knit one, purl one. But I probably would change my needle size first, since I want to do the edging on probably a smaller needle. So I would grab that smaller needle and I would knit one round just to get on that smaller needle, and then I would start my ribbing. Or twisted rib the same, you're going to knit through the back loop and then purl one, knit through the back loop and purl one, and that's your twisted rib. So that is an option as well. So that would be your short sleeve, your choice for that. Now if you want to knit a balloon sleeve, you're just going to keep going. No decreasing. You're going to keep going until the sleeve is as long as you want it to be. You can follow the pattern or anywhere between your elbow and wrist basically, and make the sleeve that long. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do that decrease round. Okay, so I'm back at my beginning of round and I want to decrease. Let's say this was the balloon sleeve. I need to get that quick decrease to give me that balloon sleeve shaping like we have right here. It's nice and wide here, and then it suddenly tapers in quickly right at the bottom, but still fairly loose. So for that, we're going to just do a quick decrease round. So your pattern will tell you, it depends on your stitch count. For mine, I have to do a knit two first, and then it is following the pattern, knit two together all the way around. So there's my knit two, knit two together, knit two together, knit two together. All right, so we do that all the way back to the beginning of our round. And now we can start our edging. We did that quick decrease. It's not going to be so noticeable on such a few stitches, but on a larger sleeve, when you do that quick decrease round, you kind of gather things in a little bit at the bottom. So then you can choose your edging. So on mine, I had reverse stockinette for 3 rounds, and that gives you like this little rolled edge, which I really like on a balloon sleeve. So I'm going to do that here. Or if you prefer, then switch your needles out to a smaller needle and do your knit one, purl one rib, or your twisted rib. You could actually work that decrease round on your smaller needles if you know you're going to switch to that as your edging. So I'm just going to work 3 rounds of purl to give me that reverse stockinette, and then I'm just going to bind off in pattern. And when you're binding off in pattern, when you're working reverse stockinette, that means you're going to purl as you bind off. So we'll do that now too. Okay, so for binding off reverse stockinette, we're just going to continue to bind off in pattern. So purl as I bind off, basically. We want to continue that stitch pattern right up to the edge. So I'm going to purl stitches and bind them off until I have bound off all of the stitches. So coming up on the last few, just purling around, and then like the hem, I'm just going to go through that last stitch and then cut the yarn and pull it up. So there is our tiny little balloon sleeve. So I'm going to do the next sleeve. I'm going to do all of the same process again, so I'm not going to record this part, but just putting all these sleeve stitches back on the needle, closing up my holes, picking up my underarm stitches, and knitting a couple of rounds, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to work that tapered sleeve with those decreases on the bottom. So I've got my second sleeve back on the needles, and we're going to discuss the tapered sleeve. So the sleeve in this mannequin example. So tapered down to the wrist. You can see that the decreases are worked right here at the underarm. So that beginning of round marker is pretty important because that's where we're going to place all of those decreases to give us this tapered sleeve. So let's go ahead and work that. So you're going to do the same exact thing as the other sleeve. You're going to pick up your stitches, close up the holes. You'll knit for about 1 inch, and if you need to adjust the sleeve length, you can shorten it up or lengthen it in that area. And then we have to start working our decreases. So I'm going to get back to my beginning of round right here. So we're going to decrease 2 stitches on every decrease round. So we're going to knit 1, work a knit 2 together, and then knit to the last 3 stitches, also all the way back around until we get just before the marker. So I'm coming back around right here, and I want to knit till I'm 3 stitches before my beginning of round marker, and we'll do our second decrease. So we did a knit 2 together on this side, so this side's going to be an SSK. And then back to my marker. Then after that, you will have a certain number of rounds that you have to knit before you repeat that decrease round. And every pattern, it's going to be a different size depending on the length of the sleeve for that size. But I'm going to knit a few rounds and then show you how you can keep track. I like to use a marker because you're going to have to do a whole bunch of decreases, and it's easier just to mark them out so you know where they were and you can just quickly count your markers. So I like to look, I can see right there, that's where this column of stitches is going underneath this one. The 2 stitches cross right there. So I put the marker right above that because this is the round that I worked that decrease. The stitches that were decreased are underneath the round I worked them on. So right there you can see, hopefully you can see, like, this column of stitches is going underneath that one and it's sitting on top. So this stitch right here is where I did that knit 2 together. So I'm just going to put that marker there, and I know there's my first decrease. So I'm going to knit around a couple of times, and then we'll show you how to count your rows in between so you'll know how to keep track of how often you need to do your decreases. All right, I'm coming back around to my beginning of round marker. And let's say in my example, I need to do a decrease every 4th round. How do we count that out? I'm going to knit 1 just to get that marker held there. So I just count my stitches. I've marked my decrease. I know that's where I did my decrease round. So then I count the stitches above that. I've got 1, 2, 3, and I have to do them on every 4th round. So I've got 3 rounds there, and this is about to be my 4th round. So now it's time to do that next decrease. Of course, you can use whatever method you like to keep track, but if you forget to write it down or use your clicker or whatever method you're using, then actually looking at your knitting is the best way to make sure you are on track. So your pattern could say you're going to repeat that every 8 rounds, every 7 rounds, every 3 rounds, every 4 rounds. So you just want to mark that decrease, and then you can just count from there, remembering that it's worked on that, whether it's the 3rd round, the 4th round. So you'll have, if it's every 3rd round, you'll have 2 plain rounds in between. If it's every 4th round, you'll have 3 plain rounds in between. If it's every 7th round, you'll have 6 plain rounds in between, and so on. So hopefully that is understandable. I can see the same here. There's my SSK. This stitch is sitting on top of that one. This is the round I worked it on. And then I can see I've got 1, 2, I've done 3 more rounds. This is my 4th round, so it's time to do the next one. And then on this round, I knit those stitches, and then I place another marker right there in that stitch. So I know that I've done my 2nd decrease, and I can keep track of all of the stitches I've had to decrease. So I'm going to knit to the end of the round, and then we're just going to bind off this sleeve. So hopefully you understand that is how you work that tapered sleeve. You are just going to repeat that decrease round however many times over however many rows you need for the length of your sleeve. And I do have a video all about adjusting. If you're like me and your arms are shorter or longer than most patterns, then you can refer to that video and adjust the sleeve length if you want to get more precise instead of just making it a little longer or shorter at the top or bottom of the sleeve. But don't feel like you have to. If this is your first sweater, just knit a sweater and get used to the whole process first. So I'm going to get back to my beginning of round. Now, if I wanted to do some ribbing, I could switch to a smaller needle size to neaten things up. But I'm just going to do the same thing as I would I'm just going to use the same needle. So I'm at the beginning of round. Oh, I'm going to leave my marker. I'm not binding off. So let's say I wanted to do twisted rib here. So I'm going to knit through the back loop, purl 1, knit through the back loop, purl 1, and that would be my twisted rib. We're going to finish a few rounds of that. Don't need my marker anymore, so I'll take that out, and then we'll bind off in pattern. We'll come back and do that. So if you've done twisted rib and you want to bind off in pattern, you can take that marker out. You're going to, of course, maintain your pattern. So knitting through the back loop, purling, there's the first 2, so now I can bind off my first stitch. And then we just continue. The next stitch is that twisted knit, so knit through the back, bind off, purl, bind off. And I'm done with this needle. So I've almost finished, and like the others, we will just snip that last one and pull it through the last loop. Maintain that pattern all the way around. And now we can talk weaving in ends and caring for our finished sweater. Now, you want to care for your sweater just like you did for the swatch. You look at the instructions on the label for the swatch. And it'll tell you if it's hand wash, dry flat, put in a washing machine. Just follow those instructions. And that is how you care for your finished sweater. So if somebody says wash and block, that's all it means. Washing and blocking is just getting it wet, perhaps laying it flat to dry. So we just have some ends to weave in now. So we have a jog in all of these locations. So we're going to talk about disguising that. And then fixing those underarms if there's any holes there. So you finished right here, and we want to connect it to this. So I like to look for my first full V on this side right here, which is right there. So I go under both legs of that, tighten it up. Then I come over here and see where look at the V's, and well, the V's are going this way as well, but I kind of want to simulate a V here. So I see where the yarn tail is coming out, and I go in that same spot. So I'm making like another V across the top. So it looks a little neater, and it closes things up down there. Then once I've done that, I can come to the inside, and ribbing is nice and easy. I just like to run it up the leg on one side, and then maybe do like a duplicate stitch over here and down this side. I split the yarn to keep the tail on the wrong side, and then I either run it down the other leg, or I might do some more duplicate stitch in that direction. If the fiber is particularly slippery, and it's plied, I might split the plies in 2 and then weave the tails in different directions. That should be enough to just hold that in place. So that's how that would look in the ribbing. Now on our neckline, it does have the same kind of little jog in there, or on the sleeve as well. Let's do the sleeve. Where we finish, we have the same jog. This does roll to the inside on the reverse stockinette, so it's not as important here, but I still sort of finish things the same. I go around looking for that V, and I find the first full V right there. Go underneath that, pull it tight, and then I simulate like creating another V. I find where this yarn tail is coming out of, and I go back down there, and that closes it up and evens it up a little bit. So for this, now we're on the stockinette side. I do like to split the plies here because I don't want this to be seen on the other side. So I kind of split it, and I get myself up to this little ridge where the reverse stockinette is up here, and then I can go back and forth with some duplicate stitch. So I'm following the path of the yarn, like there's the head, so I'm coming under these bars here and coming back around this way. And I find like splitting the plies and working in this way keeps the tail to the inside of the work, and it keeps it in place, like going back and forth like this. And I like to do this before I wash my sweater, because it locks it in place. Like once it gets wet and then dries, the yarn wants to stay in that position. Now, if you want to come back and double check your yarn tails, instead of snipping it short, like right here, you could leave like a tail and cut it here instead. And then after it's washed and dried, you would come back and check all your yarn, your tail weaves, and then you can trim them short. But this is just a little demo, so I can trim that short. So that's how I'm gonna finish that. I'll do the neckline and the other sleeve as well. Then our last thing is those underarms. So let's look at them and see how they look first of all. So that looks pretty good, I think. I mean, if I stretch it, I can see where it's like sort of overlapped right there. Now, if I wanted to, I do this very carefully, but I can come in and perhaps try to pull some of that yarn that got stretched out around that opening, pull the excess yarn away from that opening. That's one thing you can do. You just follow the path of one row of knitting. So I'm following the V's across on that row, and that can be one way to close it up, but do that carefully because you could make it worse and you don't want to do that. So that one looks pretty good, I think. Usually one side is better than the other, and yeah, this one's a little looser, but the yarn tail's on this side. So you can do a couple things. You can take the tail and sort of like loop it around on the inside and pull it tight, like the top of a hat. I like to actually like do a little stitch on the front to tighten it up. So I've got my yarn tail here, and I can see where my tail, like where it's attached, it's right there. And this is my loose, what looks really loose. So I want to like sort of cover this up. So I come up like underneath where my yarn is attached. And I don't want to bring it all to the right, like the whole tail. I don't want it to come out. So I make sure that's on the other side. Actually, I don't like that spot, so I'm going to go back down. I don't really want that right there. So what we want to do is make a new stitch right here. We're going to sort of duplicate stitch. So I just want to make sure I'm coming up in a good spot for that without splitting. Okay, maybe right there is better. Okay, so I'm pulled through. This is the stitch that I want to mimic. So I look at the stitch above, and here's the stitch above. So I'm going to go under both legs of that stitch. And you can see I'm covering up the stitch underneath. Then I'm going to go right back down where I came out. And there we go. That little bit of duplicate stitch over that gappy stitch really closed things up. Now, if it still feels like there's like it's kind of a hole right here, again, you are staring at it really close. If you're wearing the sweater and it's at a distance, it looks fine. But if it still feels really big, go to the inside and just kind of go around where that hole would be, like just catching the bars on this side. Don't try to go through to the right side of the work. You want to keep that on this side, but I'm just going to go through the bars all around where that hole is. Then I can just tighten it up. Now I'm not going to do anything yet before. I'm not weaving that end in yet. I'm going to check. Okay, I pulled it tight. That looks good. I think it looks good. Now I can go in and I can duplicate stitch over in this direction, following that path of that yarn. And that is how I would close up any remaining holes in the sleeve. So at this point, your sweater's finished. You just have to finish weaving in the ends, maybe go finish your other sleeve, and then give it a good wash and it's ready to wear. So that is the whole process, from choosing your size and swatching and making sure you are meeting gauge for the pattern, and casting on at the neckline, doing all the short rows and everything in between, right down to binding off your sleeves. Now, if you just watched this and you didn't knit along, then make sure you go grab that pattern. It's linked down below, and then rewind and start knitting your sweater with me. And if there are any questions that you have about the sweater knitting process, be sure to leave a comment down below. And if you want to look into making more modifications to your next sweater, then I have a whole playlist with lots of great things that you can do to modify the fit and the customizations in your next sweater project. So click right there and I'll see you in the next video.